course, doesn't the mind do that? You pick on one thing, and the very laser focus that gives the mind its power turns against you. Now, the best way to stop awfulizing is to, in fact, notice what you're doing and just label it. Ugh, I'm awfulizing. Then what do? Said, I could take a breath. Big sigh. And you come back. Here I am. I'm in this moment. This is a perfectly good moment. The children are not begging. I am not dying. I'm sitting in my nice warm living room surrounded by the people that I love. I could be here now, and there you are. Now, another way to overcome the dirty tricks department of the mind is to learn something about being an optimist. I always thought I was an optimist. But the fact was, I was kidding myself. I was raised by a woman with a PhD in catastrophizing, and apparently it rubbed off on me. So I now, consider myself a recovering pessimist. I want to tell you a little story about the difference between optimism and pessimism. Psychologists identify optimists and pessimists by how they respond to bad things that happen. Because we all have inconveniences in our life. And the bad thing might be getting stuck on the expressway. That's enough. It doesn't have to be something huge like some life-challenging situation. But we have frustrations every day in our busy world which will tell us, am I an optimist or a pessimist? So, sitting over here next to Albert Einstein are my two sons, Justin and Andre. And when they were growing up, we lived in Scituate, Massachusetts, not far from the North River. Who knew? It's a tidal river. It's quite a dangerous river, big currents. And we had gotten a motorboat. And we decided to take the boat out. And there we were. Justin and Andre and Natalia was with us. We're tooling down the river, and there are barrels floating. Red ones, green ones, red ones. And I'm looking at the boys, and I'm saying, what are these floating barrels? And they're saying, we don't know what they are. So we get out into the ocean. We have a marvelous afternoon. It's getting late now, 4 o'clock, 4:30. Sun's going down, we're getting a little chilled, we're a little cold, and we're zooming back down the North River when we go aground on a sandbar. Now, this is one of life's little events that will tell you how you think. If it wasn't television, I would repeat for you the mantra that years of spiritual practice brought to my lips. But apparently I don't have to, because you know this. So there we were. Now, what comes to my mind? What comes to my mind is, oh no. Now we've run aground. This is a terrible situation. It's all my fault. It's all my fault because it must have had to do with the barrels, of which I was ignorant. What kind of mother takes her children boating who knows nothing about barrels? In fact, you are such a rotten mother that you missed the last 3 PTA meetings. By the time I finished, I thought a firing squad was too good for me. And I was in a terrible frame of mind. And I figured we would never be rescued. That we were stranded there until we were just bleached skeletons upon the beach. So in this state of mind, I was awakened from my toxic reveries by Justin, who was about 14 and awash in a tide of testosterone. He was making little crowing noises from the back of the boat, little pleased noises. And I look and I said, Justin, what is it? And he says, this is the best day of my life. This is the best day of my life. And I'm going, why? And you said, Justin, because now I get to rescue you. And he really did. Because pessimistic people are not highly creative. Optimistic people are much more creative. It took him about 30 seconds to get us out of there. As I recall, you said, step out of the boat onto the sandbar. And once we were there, you had us all push the boat off the biggest part of the sandbar, step back in, and then you cast the anchor into the channel and pulled us out to it. You cast the anchor out a couple times, and pretty soon we were quite well aware of what the barrels meant and happily on our way home. Now, let me unpack this little story in terms of the optimist, Justin, and the pessimistic mother. A psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman talks about pessimism as the way that we, attribute meaning to events. The meaning that pessimists attribute, he calls the 3 Ps. That is, they take things personally. All my fault for running aground, they take things personally. Secondly, they think in a pervasive way. Not only did I not know about barrels, I'm a bad mother. That's pervasive. And they also think the situation is permanent. Because truly, if you think you are a loser today, actually you're likely to think that that's always going to be the case. So what Seligman says the war cry of a pessimist is I mess up everything I do. It's all my fault, and it's the story of my life. Personal, permanent, and pervasive. Now, if you can just remember the 3 Ps, you'll notice your inner dialogue the next time you're doing it, and that awareness will give you the capacity to make a different choice. So what choice do you make? The way Justin was thinking is what Suzanne Willette, another psychologist, says has to do with stress hardiness and optimism. The 3 Cs. So he saw us sitting on a sandbar not as a threat, but as a challenge. That's the first C. The second C is a sense of control, because although he knew you can't always control the outside circumstance, to him that was cool, because the control comes from inside, from saying, I'll rescue us. So we have challenge, control, and the third C is commitment. And commitment has to do to what do you commit yourself to in life? What is your vision? What is important to you? What is your meaning? What is your purpose? And I think Justin's commitment was at that time, and I hope still, honey, that life is about learning, that every single event that happens, positive or negative, can be great because you learned something. And if you have that commitment to that overarching point of view, you can be an optimist. Now, my next statement is so corny that I can hardly stand it. But it will help you remember how to stay peaceful by making the shift from pessimism to optimism. You have to stop peeing on yourself and learn to see things differently, okay? And that's how you manage the dirty tricks department of your mind. One other little piece of this is before you finally make it to optimism, you can adopt an inner mentor. You can think, how would somebody act who really is an optimist? And this might surprise you, Justin, but oftentimes when I get into my wimpy worst self, I really say to myself, what would Justin do in this situation? Yeah. I have a wonderful friend, Janet Quinn, and oftentimes when something happens, I say, what would Janet do? or a couple of great friends here, Robin Kasarjan, Cheryl Richardson, and I say, what would they do in this situation? Do you do that too, some of you? It's an amazing thing to have an inner mentor. There's an old saying, fake it till you make it, and that's what it's about. I have one more inner peace trick for you about imagining, about really thinking how serious is a situation. Because we get ourselves into situations where we think, oh my goodness, this is awful, and it really isn't. So Andre, this is my other beautiful son. Do you remember last Christmas we were baking that chocolate cake to bring to Chris and David's house? Oh yes. This was a big Martha Stewart day. And we did everything. We warmed up the eggs to room temperature. We cooled down the chocolate because we were making the perfect chocolate cake. However, we changed the size of the cake pan, number one. And number two, we live practically as high up as Mars. Where we live on a mountaintop at almost 9,000 feet, where the laws of physics are different than they are, and cakes rise differently. Knowing this, I set the timer 7 or 8 minutes before the cake was due, and when the buzzer ran off, Andre ran to the oven, and he stuck in a toothpick, and then I heard something like, bad news. Really bad news. The cake is vaporized. Then you said something like, possibly we could peel off the top, the bottom, and the sides of the cake and frost the crumb that remains. But the next part was the best. Because their uncle, Uncle Alan, has always had this saying called terrible thing. When something happens and it really isn't so terrible, he starts to kid you by saying terrible thing. So all of a sudden I hear a chorus of, the cake is burned, the cake is burned.
Terrible thing.
But then they didn't leave me alone. Then Justin chimes in something like, and breakfast, she only makes 20 strips of bacon for 4 people. What a crummy establishment. I don't know why we even bother coming home. And then they chanted,
terrible thing.
And then Kurt says, and she gets a new puppy. It's her turn to take it out. And what does it do? It pees on the floor. And so pretty soon we were doing what we're all doing, and that is we're laughing. And the stress dissipated. That's called exaggerating the negative. Exaggerating the negative. And then you see, it was never such a terrible thing. Last little dirty tricks department of the mind overcomer that I wanted to mention is just the art of reframing. That's all, changing your frame of reference. It's amazing, when you're most busy, that's exactly when the new puppy goes on the rug. It's Murphy's Law, isn't it? But at that moment it's up to you, because you're torn between the need to love the puppy and the desire to strangle this beautiful new puppy. And it's all in how you look at it. When you think, it's just a puppy. I love it. This puppy loves me. It licks me in the face. It lowers my blood pressure. It does good things for my immune system. Suddenly, the fact that it went on the rug is not nearly so important. It's always the frame of reference through which we see things that really makes a difference. And we can choose that. It's a matter of, we have little glasses through which we see the world. Being in a traffic jam on a busy day. How many of you have felt just horrible? You can feel your blood pressure rise, your heart rate going up. Inner peace has evaporated because you're stuck in the traffic. That's when you begin to think the world is against you. all of the traffic lined up just because you were there, right? Now, you can look at it a different way. All alone in your car, a chance to relax, a chance to what? Take that big sigh of relief. Take a few breaths. And there's that old affirmation, I could choose peace instead of this, from A Course in Miracles. And you could. Could be a wonderful time to listen to music. Could be a wonderful time just to breathe and be mindful and be present. It's your choice. And that's always the bottom line. That life is going to be busy. Life is going to be difficult. We can't always change what comes into our life. But we can always choose the frame of reference through which we look at it and approach it with a little bit of compassion, a little bit of good humor, an ability to exaggerate the negative and find the positive through that. There's an old saying, a great refrain. I don't know who said this, but I've loved it. And it's this: everything is okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. I want to talk about taking care of yourself, because what I found is that the busier we get, the less time we have to really take care of ourselves, and that so many of us put ourselves absolutely last on our own to-do list. My friend here, Cheryl Richardson, would call this extreme self-care, learning to take care of ourselves. And a friend of mine by the name of Tina Lear, who is an incredible musician, gave me one of the greatest lessons in self-care one summer when we were all getting together on a beautiful island in the Pacific Northwest, a whole group of friends that comes together every summer. And the particular night that we began our kind of friendship week, Tina came in all harried and hassled, and it was a storytelling night. This is fun if you've never done it. Get together with a group of friends, and anybody who wants to can have 3 minutes to tell a story from your life. You'd be surprised at how long 3 minutes is. So Tina decided to tell a story about herself the day before, when she was so hassled and busy trying to get out a CD that she didn't think she was even going to get a chance to come to the gathering. And I've done that many times. I've ended up working instead of doing what I really wanted to do in my heart, given up time with family and friends just to get the to-do list done. And we have to remember, the to-do list will exist after you're dead. It's immortal. It just keeps growing. But she had this epiphany, this amazing epiphany. She was rushing around getting everything done, and suddenly she said, what if Thich Nhat Hanh lived inside me? What if my body was host to him? And Thich Nhat Hanh is the archetype of inner peace. He's a meditation teacher, a Buddhist monk, a peacemaker. You figure this man never had a stressful moment in his life. So peaceful. And she said, if Thich Nhat Hanh lived inside me, would I really refuse to let him go to the bathroom just because I was too busy? If I were host to Thich Nhat Hanh, and he'd been working all day, and here it was, the summer in all of its abundant beauty, and he wanted to take a mindful, relaxing walk, would I hold him prisoner because the Xeroxing wasn't finished? And then she thought, when it got to be 10 at night and he was exhausted, would I refuse to let him go until the last stamp had been licked? And then she realized somebody dear and precious did live inside of her. Why is any of us any less precious than Thich Nhat Hanh or Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa or the Buddha. Someone so precious lives in you. And yet, I think for many of us, we treat ourselves as if we don't matter at all. So I thought of that story many, many times when I've gone crazy with busyness, and it brings me back to sanity. And I think, how would I treat someone dear and precious? And I could do that for myself. There have been many times in my life when I've been quite peaceful. And because I'm human, there are times that things conspire and I go off the deep edge. I've fallen off the Yerkes-Dodson curve. I've forgotten to breathe. You're all breathing. And one of the difficult things, I think, is the more stressed we are, the less likely we are to remember what we know, and we tend to go a little bit nutty and forget it all and start a big downhill slide. A couple of years ago, I had a time like that. Everything was melting down on every front of my life, and I felt really depleted. So I showed up at a beautiful place, Maho Bay. I was part of a conference in Maho Bay, which is absolutely gorgeous on the Caribbean island of St. John. And I met a wonderful woman there called Dr. Donna, who actually became my personal coach for a year and really helped me look at my life and look at my priorities. Dr. Donna introduced me to a great concept called the well scale, as in how full is your well. Now, if you want to measure your stress levels, there's a zillion scales out there. You know what they find? Really the simplest scale, and one that's as good as any other, is just to say this: on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed are you? And guess what? People actually know. They can tell you. So much for millions of dollars of scale development. So what Donna did is just said, how full is your well? If 10 is full and 0 is empty. It was easy for me. I said, Donna, I'm sucking mud. And, you know, it's that matter of awareness again. Awareness. Because oftentimes we are sucking mud or close to it, but we're too busy to notice. I'll notice that I'm sucking mud when I'm in the hospital, dead from the stress of it. It's good to notice a little bit before. What I've noticed now, working with this for a while, is when my well gets lower than a 7. That's when I've gone over the edge of the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And that's when, unless I do something to push myself back and up a little bit, I'm going to go into a rapid downhill slide. It's the danger zone, the red flag zone, the alarms are ringing zone. So then I said, I'm going to make a list of the things that fill my well again. Now, I spend most of my life, it seems, on airplanes. And I hear several times a week the stewardess saying, please secure your own oxygen mask first before you secure the one next to you. And I think that really is a good analogy. You can't take care of the people who depend on you if you're an absolute wreck yourself. There's just no doubt about it. It's not selfishness, it's self-care. You want to have a heart of compassion and kindness and goodness to extend to others. You can't do it when you're sucking mud. So the oxygen list I made up for myself is something that you can all make up for yourselves. What gives you energy? What gives you joy? I know for me, taking a walk makes all the difference in the world. And it's really easy to get so busy in the office that I don't think of doing it. But if I say to myself, this is one small step, I could do this one little thing. I could go out into the daylight. Guess what? All of a sudden we find out My, sunlight does something to your pineal gland. You manufacture more melatonin and you sleep. It raises your serotonin levels so that you're less depressed. If scientists would have just listened to our grandmother, we could have saved a fortune. But it's like we have to have the data now before we do these obvious things. Taking a walk is a great thing to do for me. Little things, eating a well-balanced meal that actually tastes good. What do you think that happens when you are as stressed as can be and you add the all ham hocks diet to your already busy life? This is not good for you. And the all bean sprouts diet isn't good either. There were a couple of studies done that showed, 2 studies, that men with the lowest cholesterol levels had the highest suicide rates. Interesting. Now, I think women with the lowest cholesterol levels might have the highest homicide rates. But, sometimes I think, has common sense totally deserted us?